Hello there, welcome to Noon Prayer Watch. It is Friday, the weekend is here. Shabbat Shalom. Hope y'all had a good week. This is Jacob coming to you from Osaka, Japan. Thank you for tuning in or catching up on the replay after the broadcast. Always appreciated. Thank you for engaging with our content, liking it, subscribing to our channels, sharing it even if you feel you need to do so. We appreciate it very much. You support our ministry and you're a part of it. We are here on the wall watching, praying, and discussing what is happening in our communities, cities, nations, and planets. How's the weather where you are today? Time for a little small talk before we get into the main topic of today. It's really cold out here in Japan. We had like the coldest day of the year so far, -4 Celsius or 24 degrees Fahrenheit, high of like 35 or 5 degrees Celsius. It's really cold, and we don't have a lot of insulation and all that kind of stuff. They're not big on that here for a variety of reasons. They keep it old school. So, whatever the weather is outside, it's inside the house as well. Even if you have a heater on, it's still rather chilly, especially in the hallways or whatever. We don't have like central AC or heating and all that kind of stuff. But, I'm used to it. I've been here out a while. You just got to dress up warm and you know what you're getting into and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, wherever you are in the world, hopefully you are staying warm and or cool if it's summer where you are. Some places in the world it's really hot right now, like in the southern hemisphere. That being said, let's go ahead and get into today's topic. We're going to talk about President Trump today. There's been a lot of stuff happening in the news. We're back to these like 2-day news cycles. This was a thing back in this first administration. So much is happening. He says so many different things. President Trump does so many different things, and usually it's pretty dramatic, pretty bombastic. Again, he is a master at controlling media narratives. He always gives the media things, to make a story about, gets people's attention, and never fails to impress. And the thing is, if you don't remember, we've had 4 years of President Biden where this really wasn't a thing. Not a lot happened. He'll say something, and then people freak out about that, and then 2 days later he'll say something else, and the previous thing that he said we've forgotten about. And so it makes like a news cycle. It makes time feel like it's a lot longer than it is. Like this week feels if you watch the news and you pay attention to what's going on, so much has happened, and like the stuff that happened on Monday, it feels like ancient history, and we're not talking about any of that anymore, and no one's mad about it anymore because we're focused on the thing we're doing right now. He's very good at that. Is he doing it intentionally, or is it just a consequence of just how he is? I don't know. I still haven't figured it out after all of these years, over a decade of him being, in the forefront of the media. news cycle and all that kind of stuff. For example, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, when this was happening, I thought about, addressing it here on Noon Prayer Watch, but it's basically over. And that was that President Trump proposed that America raise tariffs on Canada and Mexico by 25%. That caused a lot of hullabaloo in the media world. Mexico and Canada retaliated. Of course, they got to show that they're strong, not going to get pushed around. Said that they would retaliate with 25% tariffs on American goods. And, of course, President Trump said that if they did that, he would just bump America's tariffs up to 50%. All of this drama happened, and this tariff trade war probably not going to happen because the leaders of Canada and Mexico met with American officials, and they proposed to do some changes to address some of the issues that America is concerned with, particularly with border security and all of the illegal opioids and drugs flowing in, which I found out through all of this, a lot's flowing in through Canada now. And a lot of illegal immigration, especially people on terror watch lists, are coming in through Canada because Canada has very lax immigration laws. There's, especially through their student visa program, there's like 50,000. I heard someone say there's 50,000 people on student visas in Canada that have just disappeared. Where they go, they disappear into Canada or they come into America, I'm not sure. And so there's some systems there that are lax, that are being exploited, that is affecting, of course, America. And so the Trump administration wants to address that and has done so, and did something dramatic like raise tariffs on Canada, which would absolutely cripple their economy, especially their oil industry. But concessions have been made. Will those concessions actually work? Will the governments in Canada and Mexico actually, competently address the issues America has? I have my doubts, but we'll see. We'll see how all of that goes. So that's how, that happened. But that felt like 2-3 weeks ago, but it was less than a week, if I'm not mistaken. I don't even remember. But some things have been announced within the last few days that have eclipsed that in how dramatic it is. And it concerns the Middle East, concerns Israel, which, of course, as you know, is always a topic that we talk about on this channel because it's very important spiritually as well as geopolitically. It affects our lives all over the world, even, me out here in East Asia. So, but here's the thing. President Trump, he is a negotiator. He's a businessman. Everybody knows this. He's famous for it. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. He's very famous for that book. And everybody knows this about him. And yet, after 10 years, people haven't figured out. He gets up in front of the media. He says something crazy, outrageous, and people freak out. And they forget that, sometimes he's just doing it in order to create a position where he can negotiate for something. And, what he's saying might not actually come to pass. And so we in the kingdom, we don't need to be swayed by all the drama. We need to be sober-minded. We need to be rational. We don't need to jump to conclusions. And, of course, we need to pray that whatever the will of the Lord actually is, that's what gets carried out. America has a lot of influence. That influence needs to be used wisely. It needs to be in line with the will of the Lord, whichever direction that may go. So that being said, the topic that I want to talk about today, Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, came to visit President Trump in America, and they had a press conference where President Trump announced a radical new plan concerning the future of the Gaza Strip. So here is an article. We're not going to read it all, but just showing you, if you're viewing at home, Trump says Israel would hand Gaza to the U.S. when the war ends. No American troops needed there. That's a interesting headline because the war is basically over. There's a ceasefire right now. They're exchanging hostages. Of course, Hamas and other of their friends still have presence in the Gaza Strip. But does this mean that the war is still on? We're not sure. But basically, President Trump has said that after the fighting, it would be turned over to the United States, Gaza Strip, by Israel in the conclusion of the fighting. But he said there won't be any soldiers there, and that they're going, America is going to rebuild the enclave. So how that's going to work, how they're going to force that, not really sure. Details aren't really that important. As he said before in a different context, he has a concept of a plan here. It would be turned over to the United States by Israel. And what I think is going on here is a reverse King Solomon situation. If you remember, of course, the famous story, King Solomon, he is presiding over court, and two women come to him. They have a baby. They're fighting over the baby. Whose, baby is it? And so King Solomon says, cut the baby in half. And then the real mother says, no, don't cut the baby in half. Give it to her, because she's the real mother and wanted the baby to survive. So we're doing kind of a reverse here. The baby in this situation is Gaza, and rather than people fighting over whose it is, no one wants to take responsibility for it. All of the other Arab neighbor nations don't want to have anything to do with it, but they want Gaza to remain there because that gives them, for one, that gives them geopolitical points against who they think their enemy is, Israel and the West and all that kind of stuff. But two, they have a religious obligation to support their fellow Arab brothers and sisters, even though they don't actually like them. And if they come out and say, no, we're not going to support them anymore, that's going to cause a lot of chaos back in their nations. And so they're doing it, to save their own skins as well. I'm not really even sure if, some of the leaders in these other Arab nations actually care. I mean, we don't see any action or anything to help them or whatever. They just want them to stay there and keep saying they want a Palestinian state. So, what has President Trump done? Well, no one wants to take responsibility over it. America will. It's going to become part. What is it going to be, like a U.S. territory or something? That's going to be interesting if that actually happens. But that is what he is proposing to do. He says things like the U.S. working with great development teams from all over the world would slowly and carefully begin construction on what would become one of the greatest and most spectacular developments of its kind on Earth. Trump continued, adding no soldiers in the U.S. would be needed. And again, Republican lawmakers, they're worried about that. People don't want to entangle with some other conflict or whatever. He says they're not going to be needed, which is, again, a really interesting proposition here. He said that stability for the region would remain. He goes on. He makes a post here. I'm not going to read it. But here's the thing. Some people need to be relocated, whether temporarily or permanently. He floated the idea that Egypt and Jordan would take in some of the refugees from Gaza while the strip would be rebuilt. Of course, these two nations do not agree with this proposal at all for a variety of reasons. They don't want to deal with them because they've had drama with Palestinians in the past. Go look up some of the rebellions in Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt has already dealt with, like the Muslim Brotherhood and all that kind of stuff that's completely integrated with the terror groups there. They don't want to deal with all of that. They want other people to deal with it. What is interesting, however, is, I don't know where, it's somewhere in this article. Prime Minister Netanyahu is up there, and President Trump's making this proposal, and I don't think Bibi, his nickname, I don't think he was expecting that. He didn't know about this. Article talks about, he didn't know that this proposal was in the works. And if you watch the video, I couldn't find it, but if you watch the video of Netanyahu listening to the proposal, he's kind of like, are you serious? He's trying to smile. This has been a big problem for Netanyahu, and suddenly America is going to come in and take this problem off his hands potentially. He looked very happy, but it was a professional press conference, and he was trying to contain his glee. I think that's my judgment of his nonverbal indications there. So that happened. That's what's going on. We can go into the details or whatever, but I don't think this, we'll talk about what I think in a minute, but let's look at some reactions from some of the neighbors. I've already kind of said it though. Egypt said privately They're warning that Trump's Gaza plan endangers the peace treaty with Israel. It's from at the end of the from the 70s. Basically, Israel used to have a lot more land, including Gaza, as well as the Sinai Peninsula, and they made an agreement with Egypt. We're going to withdraw, and then they'll have amicable relations with Israel. And they said that it's been around for, this agreement's been around for 50 years. They said this agreement will be in danger. I really don't think Egypt will actually do anything, even if I think they're bluffing, honestly, because what are they going to do? This has been the status quo for so long, and I don't think Egypt wants to get involved with, militarily with anything with Israel. So they're not happy about that. Then Jordan, of course, or no, Jordan isn't either. Here's where the plot thickens here. Can I make this smaller? Some people think this whole thing is a pitch aimed at reeling in Riyadh or Saudi Arabia. But will the Saudis bite? Again, we're not going to read this. But this is what President Trump is doing. He is saying these things. He is trying to get other nations around involved. I don't know if this is actually going to happen here. I found a thread by a guy on Twitter. He's a Israeli that posts analysis on these situations, and here's what he had to say. And I think this really helped me understand the situation here. He says, it's a guy named Raylan Givens. He says, is Trump's Gaza plan real or not? After all the excitement from yesterday's meeting between Trump and Bibi, Prime Minister Netanyahu, let's try to understand what is behind it. Is it real, or is Trump just shaking things up? I have significant doubts the U.S. will take over Gaza. I think Trump put it out there because this is what he knows how to do best, negotiate. And this time he negotiates using Middle Eastern language, and he also knows how to build stuff too. He's a real estate, developer. So even if he were to actually do this, building things is what he's good at. Anyway, the best commodity or asset in the Arab world is land. People will die for it, and losing land is the worst thing that can happen in Arab culture. So Trump decided to use this commodity to negotiate. The only significant difference here is now he is using it against the Arab world. For the past 58 years, Palestinians have gotten used to the fact that no matter how brutal or savage they act, the world will not hold them accountable. After every act of terrorism, even the most brutal one like on October 7th, back in 2023, the U.S. will immediately pivot to the two-state solution and the need for Israel to give back land. It took Biden just a few weeks after the horrible massacre of Jews on the Holocaust of October 7th to return to this two-state solution, which, side note, we have said on this channel multiple times, these broadcasts multiple times, the two-state solution is a fantasy. But it's politically correct, and so that's why politicians keep jumping to it. Trump decided to change this horrible policy, but he did it brilliantly. His plan was to send a message to the Arab world on two fronts. One, no more rewards for slaughtering Jews. Instead, you will get the punishment in the form of losing land forever. Second, he ripped the mask off the Arab world that claimed the Palestinians are their brothers and sisters for 58 years and is now holding them to it by demanding they accept them into their countries. In essence, what Trump did is force the Arab world and the Palestinians to negotiate on land they lost, not 58 years ago, but on land they lost. Now, if you want Gaza back, here's what you will need to give it for it. Let me emphasize this. The negotiation now is not about Judea and Samaria. It is about Gaza and Gaza only, which I also find interesting. You can see the panic in the Arab world today. Egypt called a meeting of all the Arab countries. Reports this morning are that Egypt is pushing construction materials and heavy equipment into Gaza to try to create the illusion that Gazans don't need to be relocated because construction has started. Trump, the ultimate negotiator, made a firm decision not to follow the same mistakes of the past that only led to death and destruction in the Middle East. For the first time in decades, he held the Palestinians accountable for their actions and forced the Arab world to act instead of just talk. He blew a hole right through their main accusation for the past 58 years, occupation, because he said the U.S. would take the land, not Israel. So Israel's out of the picture here. Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, which depend on U.S. support, will not dare calling the U.S. an occupier. They know if he actually implements his plan, it's over for the Palestinians. And I thought that was very good analysis by Mr. Givens. Here, a couple of things. We need to pray that, of course, President Trump makes the right decision regarding Gaza here. Gaza it's an interesting place because it's part of the land that God, going to the spiritual issue here, it's a part of the land that God promised his people. It's part of the promised land. But the Hebrews, Israelites, the Jews never have really ever ruled over Gaza. Only from 1967, after the Six-Day War, to 2005. That's the only time Jews have ever in history ruled Gaza. But way back, it was ruled by all the other, empires that ruled the rest of Israel. But during the time of, after the Exodus, everything like that, the events you read in the Bible, they never controlled Gaza. That was where the Philistines lived. You read about the Philistines a lot. You see Gaza in the text sometimes. So they only had it for about 40, 50 years, and then they left at the behest of President Bush, and that created a vacuum where Hamas took over, and now we have the situation that we're in right now, trying to solve all of this. So we have said at this ministry multiple times that we believe it was a mistake for President Bush to push Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to take Israel out of Gaza. And we can see, all these years later, the results of that, the fruit of those actions. And so now we're trying to fix it. So hopefully America, who caused this problem that we are having right now, hopefully we can fix it here. So, but Gaza is also interesting because if you talk to some Israelis, they don't see Gaza as part of their country because it never really has been. They view, Judea, Samaria as a part, especially Judea, as a part of their country. But I don't see a strong urge from Israelis themselves to integrate it into Israel, despite it being part of the land God promised his people. So if the USA comes in and helps manage Gaza for a time, eventually we believe on a spiritual level that land needs to be given over to the Israelis, and they need to actively manage it this time. And I think they will because, of what happened 2 years ago, unfortunately. Any other political entity that would manage Gaza, there's going to be problems. It's going to take a long time for it to ever to become stable if it's independent, and it's always going to be susceptible to terrorism. And so we have this situation now with West Bank, with Israel, with Gaza, and I'm seeing some shifts here in the conversations and how people are talking about this issue. For one, I see that people are accepting the reality that Gaza will not be a part of a Palestinian state. There will not be a two-state solution. It's either one state or three. Gaza and the West Bank, for one, there's a gap there, but they can't work together. Two different groups of Palestinians are in charge of each group. They don't like each other. They will fight each other. If they were ever in a state together, there would be civil war. Eventually, whether it's soon or not. I'm also, I already said that. I also see people give up on the idea of a two-state solution. I'm also seeing a lot of people talk about relocating people in Gaza and Palestine to other places like Egypt, Jordan. I've heard Ireland. I think it was a joke though. I've heard Indonesia. Even Japan here wants to take some for medical reasons if people need medical care. Jordan though is an interesting idea because that was originally the land allocated for a Palestinian state. You had the Jordan River, the East Bank would be for the Palestinians, the West Bank would be for the Jews. That plan, of course, didn't work out. But now we're kind of shifting back to that. That's the original plan there. So we'll see what happens. Oops. So we'll see what happens. We'll watch from the wall. We will be praying that the will of the Lord be carried out in this area of the world. And now I want to shift our focus to Judea and Samaria. I just mentioned that. Speaking of these two areas here, the Trump administration will soon release its position on the annexation of Judea and Samaria by Israel in the next couple of weeks. And so we really need to pray for our government that they will support Israel in this endeavor. Judea obviously is the homeland of the Jewish people. There have been Jews living in this part of the world for at least 3,000 years. When you read about them going to this land in the Bible, they have been there. They went there. They have been there ever since, regardless of what empire, what power ruled over the land. There have been Jews in that land, even if it's just been a few. Some have left, some have come back, but they have always had a presence there. That's where they get their name from, after all. And they are potentially ready to take more of it back in an official capacity. So obviously, got to throw this out there. The word Jew was used not at the beginning, when the Israelites went in. It was used much later, but they are the same people. Some people like to make silly, pedantic arguments about that. They'll say the Jews weren't here. They didn't exist until, this year. It's the same people. It was a tribe of Israelites, and they became a nation later, and they used that name later. So let's not get silly there. Some people do that. You'd be surprised. I've seen silly arguments like that on the internet all the time. However, I had seen reports that President Trump had already supported this idea, but I couldn't find a source for it. However, there is this announcement from the government. From Jerusalem Post, if you're again watching at home on the screen, it says that the U.S. will announce position on the West Bank annexation over the next 4 weeks. The U.S. will likely announce its position regarding Israeli annexation of the West Bank in the course of the next 4 weeks. President Trump said during a press conference this was the same press conference he talked about in taking over Gaza. Not much here, but he just says that they're going to announce it soon. He's probably trying to figure out how to do all of that. And this is why. Normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia. Earlier on Tuesday, officials told Jerusalem Post that Netanyahu may concede the annexation of the West Bank in favor of advancing and normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia. In recent closed-door talks, the U.S. president said the annexation of the West Bank was off the table. Earlier in January, Yesha Council Chairman Israel Gans told the Post that annexation is on the table with the Trump administration, but it would take time. So he's probably trying to negotiate a deal here. We need to pray that, of course, America takes a biblical stance on this issue. We're not sure how exactly this is going to look right now. A couple of months ago, I also covered a story where Senator Tom Cotton introduced a bill to refer to Judea and Samaria by their names rather than use the problematic West Bank. And he has reintroduced that legislation once again. This happened again about 3 days ago. Senator Tom Cotton today reintroduced the retiring egregious confusion over the genuine name of Israel's zone of influence by necessitating government use of Judea and Samaria, or the Recognizing Judea and Samaria Act. And so, again, we're going to stop, the government will stop saying West Bank. They will call it Judea and Samaria, their traditional historical names, which is good because that's what the reality of it is. That's what it's called there. West Bank was a new term used when they were trying to create Palestinian and Israeli state back in the 1940s and all that, 1920s to 1940s, after World War I, World War II, all of that time. So that's West Bank is a new word. It's traditionally called Judea and Samaria. So President Trump is, of course, seeking to bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords. He wants to normalize relations between these two nations. And if that happens, that's going to be a very, very big deal. We're getting close to that before Hamas launched their attack on October 7th. So we pray. We're going to see what happens. It's a very tricky situation, but we're seeing the ball being shifted to the Arab states in this issue now, and it hasn't been for a long time. It's always been put back on Israel, back on the West, because they keep supporting the Palestinians, and there's still problems, and the Arab nations are not helping facilitate any solution to this issue here. Okay. Yeah, the story, I have a couple of notes here, but the story, the thread I read by that guy on Twitter kind of covered all of it. We need to just pray that America will be blessed in accordance with the promise that God made to Abraham. If you bless my people, you will be blessed. If you curse my people, it will be cursed. Also, we shouldn't divide the land up here. So we gotta pray. We gotta pray. The last thing I got, and then we will wrap up for today. A little bit different, but U.S. aid, foreign aid to organizations both in America and all over the world. Lots of crazy stuff is going on here. Mr. Elon Musk, you might know him. He is the richest man in the world. He is working with the Trump administration to find wasteful spending, to cut it, because there's, of course, a lot of it going around. And this is a big story in and of itself. There's so much going on. You could spend hours, days even reading about what they're doing, the impacts of it, and to talk about it. That could be a whole another broadcast by itself. But that's not really what we're here. We're here to more focus on spiritual issues. But what's interesting is opponents of America, both in the media as well as actual terrorist organizations all over the world, they're somehow getting, this aid money. There's probably a lot of criminal stuff going on. There's a lot of money laundering. Who knows? There's a lot of different things. There's a lot of little snakes all over the world. And right now, the heads of these snakes are being cut off. Opponents of America and their allies are panicking right now because their funds are suddenly drying up. You might see a lot less anti-American sentiment in the world and the media because we're cutting off their funding and their sources. We'll see. Is everything they're cutting necessary? Are there good programs that are being cut? Probably, but that remains to be seen. And we just got to keep looking and praying here. But let's talk about one big thing here, and that's, of course, we knew this, but a lot of money from U.S. foreign aid going to the Middle East, getting into the hands of terrorists. We knew this. Now we have, officially we know, if we didn't already, we have data to back it up. We have sources to back this up. We're supporting Israel, of course, but our money is also getting to their enemies. And so we're having, these two groups fighting a war, and we're funding both sides of it. And that's a bit ridiculous. We should be only funding one side. We shouldn't be doing both sides. So here I have a couple of articles to show you. From the Middle East Forum, new MEF report exposes 164 million in U.S. aid grants to Islamist organizations, and 122 million of that have been linked to terror groups. With U.S. aid now under the State Department control, reforms are urgent. How did taxpayer money fund jihad? And I'm not going to read the article, but there's just the headline there, and I saw a funny reaction to it. Again, if you're watching at home, you can look at your screen here. This is the famous meme that came out. A guy named Alim Bokhari said, this is when, Hamas was shooting rockets at Israel and the Iron Dome comes out, and it says, my tax dollars. And then somehow also my tax dollars. We, of course, fund the Iron Dome, but some of our money is going to Hamas, and they're using it to make rockets with construction materials and things like that we gave them to build up, their enclave there. Someone made a new version of it and said, U.S. aid versus U.S. aid here. And that's pretty much what's happening. And now, thankfully, we're putting a stop to this madness. This is a bit ridiculous here. So we need to continue to pray that President Trump and his administration will cut off these resources to enemies of America and our allies, enemies to the kingdom of God even. When there's so much money being thrown around, it's very easy for bad guys or criminals to take advantage of us. No longer shall this be, especially with all the issues America has domestically. So, in conclusion, we pray for a resolution to the situation in Gaza. We pray for President Trump to make right kingdom biblical decisions on his stance towards Judea and Samaria, they being fully integrated into Israel. We cannot fear man. Saudi Arabia, whatever nation doesn't like it, we can't fear them. We have to do what is correct, what is accordance, with the will of the Lord, because He'll take care of us. Because we have faith in Him to do that. He is in control, and other nations will have to submit to Him, and Bible literally talks about that. So we don't fear man, we fear the Lord. We do what He wants us to do. And we also pray that resources from America will no longer be stolen by the enemy and used against us, used against us, and used to do terrible things, and used to enrich these leaders. Because a lot of this money just makes it to the pockets of the leaders of these nations, like the guys who run Hamas and other terrorist groups. And that's not cool. They don't need that money. We can use it for other things, much better than letting them live nice lives in Qatar and Dubai and all those places. Turkey, I guess they're in there now. Anyway, that is all I have to share with you today. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell. This is a small way you can help support this ministry. If you'd like to donate an offering, we have the CCS app. You can donate on there accordingly. If you do that, thank you very much for supporting this ministry, helping us get this word out. Be blessed and have a great weekend. Stay warm or cool depending on where you are in the world. And remember always to bring order to chaos. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.